Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into humanity's very first major technological revolution. We're talking about the era that literally pulled us out of the Stone Age, jump-started the birth of writing, and laid the actual foundation for modern society as we know it today. We're going to explore how blending two relatively soft, unimpressive metals created a supermaterial that completely rewrote human history.
So, think about our modern tech boom for a second. The internet, smartphones, silicon chips, right? These innovations forced the entire globe into this tightly woven, interconnected network. While the Bronze Age was the ancient equivalent of that global tech boom. Once early humans figured out what bronze could do, it created an absolute frenzy. But here's the catch. Because the ingredients for bronze were scattered so unevenly across the planet, these isolated tribes and growing empires had absolutely no choice but to reach out and connect.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. 1. Forging the Bronze Age. 2. Cities, kings, and writing. 3. The first global supply chain. 4. Unique bronze cultures worldwide. And finally, 5. The Great Bronze Age collapse.
Part 1. Forging the Bronze Age, the spark of innovation. Now you might be wondering, why did bronze come before iron? I mean, iron is naturally abundant all over the planet, right? Well, it really just comes down to temperature. Neolithic kilns, the ones originally used for firing pottery, they maxed out at about 900 degrees Celsius. Smelting iron requires a staggering 1250 degrees. It was simply impossible for them. But early humans realized that with a bit of ingenuity and some forced air, they could melt copper at 1085 degrees and easily melt tin at just 232 degrees. By alloying or mixing these two together, they created a metal far harder and way more durable than anything they'd ever seen before.
Part 2. Cities, Kings, and Writing. The civilization boom.
To really anchor us in time here, let's think about the Near East, which was the first region to fully enter this era. We're looking at a vast, sweeping stretch of history. It begins way back around 3300 BC with the early Bronze Age, pushes through the middle and late periods, and then ends in this sudden catastrophic collapse around 1200 BC. That is over 2,000 years where bronze was the undisputed king of materials, driving human progress forward. And this incredible era sparked societal leaps that happened almost simultaneously in places like Mesopotamia and Egypt. Because bronze tools made agriculture so much more efficient, suddenly not everyone had to farm anymore. This totally freed up human capital. We see the invention of the potter's wheel, the rise of centralized hereditary monarchies, and the creation of written law codes. Actually, the pure necessity of managing these new, complex city-states gave birth to the very first practical writing systems, like Sumerian cuneiform and Egyptian hieroglyphs. It literally laid the groundwork for astronomy, mathematics, and complex religion.
Part 3. The first global supply chain. Trading for tin. But there was a massive catch to this civilization boom. Copper is relatively common, sure. But tin? That magic ingredient you absolutely need to turn copper into hard bronze? It is incredibly rare. Remember that number, 232 degrees Celsius. That ultra-low melting point basically made tin the silicon of the ancient world. You just couldn't run a civilization without it. And because it's only found in a few scattered places globally, these massive long-distance trade networks were forced into existence just to feed the insatiable demand.
So early humans weren't digging deep, complicated underground mines for this stuff. They largely exploited what we call alluvial deposits, sand and gravel left behind by ancient rivers. They basically panned for tin, much like 19th century miners panned for gold. Just, with fewer pickaxes and a whole lot more desperation. Finding these rare deposits became a literal matter of national security for ancient empires, and this deep desperation for tin led to an unprecedented intermingling of cultures. For the very first time in history, long-distance trade routes for luxury goods and metals stretched thousands of miles across both land and sea.
Part 4. Unique bronze cultures worldwide. Contrast and surprise.
As these trade routes expanded, the secret of bronze spread like wildfire across the globe. But what is truly fascinating is that different regions reacted to this powerful new technology in vastly different ways. It's a real contrast. If we compare the Wessex culture in Great Britain to the Ban Chiang site in modern-day Thailand, we see two completely divergent paths. In Britain, bronze fueled tribal complexity, deeply entrenched social hierarchies, wealth accumulation, and intense warfare. But over in Southeast Asia, almost the exact opposite. Ban Chiang reveals a cooperative social distribution, what anthropologists call a heterarchical network, with basically no entrenched hierarchy and a very peaceful agricultural society. Over in Great Britain, the Bronze Age brought massive cultural upheaval and migration. In fact, it's wild. Isotope research on tooth enamel from bodies found near Stonehenge actually reveals that migrants traveled there from as far away as present-day Switzerland. On top of that, regions like Devon and Cornwall became these massive industrial hubs. Their super-rich tin deposits essentially fueled the entire bronze boom for Western Europe, which ended up consolidating immense wealth and power squarely in the hands of the elite.
But again, contrast that with Southeast Asia. At sites like Bayan-Chang, we see early adoption of on-site bronze casting, sure. Yet the archaeological data consistently shows a total absence of the warlords and the highly unequal empires that we see in the West. It's a profound historical reminder for us. Massive technological leaps do not inherently guarantee social inequality or warfare. At the end of the day, technology is just a tool. It's the culture itself that decides how to wield it.
Part 5. The Great Bronze Age Collapse, when the network fails. For those empires in the Near East and the Mediterranean, the ones that did build vast, hierarchical, interconnected empires based on bronze, a very dark, intense horizon was quickly approaching. By 1200 BC, the world was this tightly wound clock of trade. Egypt, the Hittites, the Mycenaeans, the Minoans, they all heavily relied on one another. So it really begs the question, what exactly happens to a highly complex, deeply interconnected system when the critical supply chains suddenly snap? The historical record paints a remarkably dark, incredibly intense picture of systemic failure here. It wasn't just one bad year. It was a devastating, suffocating domino effect. A heavy, bleak shadow of climate disaster, severe drought, and brutal famine crept across Anatolia, the region north of the Black Sea, which basically acted as the agricultural breadbasket of the era, suffered a sudden, grim population loss. And once the food stopped moving, the sprawling trade routes shattered completely. Once those routes broke, empires were totally cut off from the tin and copper they desperately needed just to maintain their militaries and their economies. It was an absolute freefall into darkness.
The human cost of this collapse was staggering, cloaking these once vibrant golden civilizations in absolute ruin. As the records note, Minoan client states were decimated by famine and pestilence. Because the global trade network had collapsed into literal ash, they couldn't even import the food they needed to survive. The tragedy here is that the very interconnectedness that made the Bronze Age so incredibly prosperous and advanced is exactly what made its collapse so total, so dark, and so deeply devastating. When one single pillar fractured, the entire ancient world violently fell. Which leaves us with this final thought. The mighty Bronze Age, a period of unprecedented innovation, global trade, and human connection, was ultimately brought to its knees because its complex, interconnected supply chains were just too fragile to withstand systemic shocks. As we sit here today, looking at our own highly globalized, fiercely interconnected modern world, it certainly gives you something to think about, doesn't it?